Hi everyone, I'm Liren Shan. Today I'll present our work, Expandable K-means, Don't Be Greedy, Plant Bigger Trees. This is a joint work with Konstantin Makarychev. First, let's talk about the classic K-means clustering problem. For this problem, we are given a set of endpoints x in the d-dimensional Euclidean space x and the number of clusters k. Then we need to choose a set of k-centers C and create a k-clustering based on these centers. We assign each point x to its closest center in the center set C. Let the cost for this point x be the square distance from x to its closest center. Then our goal is to find a set of k-centers to minimize the total cost. However, this clustering induced by centers is usually hard to understand by human. For example, consider the point x in the middle of the figure. It is not easy to tell which center this point x should be assigned to. To find the closest center, we need to compute all distances from x to centers. This clustering forms a Voronoi diagram, which usually has a complicated boundary. Thus, a natural question is, can we find a clustering which is easy to understand by human? Dasgupta et al. Proposed to use threshold decision trees for expandable clustering. The threshold decision tree is a special kind of decision tree that uses only threshold cards. This means every internal node of the tree picks a threshold in a single feature to partition the space into two disjoint parts. Then the decision tree partitions all data points into k-leaves to form a k-clustering. For this clustering, the cluster boundaries are axis parallel hyperplanes, which are easy to understand by human. Dasgupta et al. Also used the k-means cost to evaluate the quality of the expandable clustering. They assign 1 centers for each leaf of the decision tree. Thus, the decision tree T assigns every point x to a center Tx. The cost of the decision tree T equals to the sum of the square distance between x and Tx. Note that this clustering cost is very similar to the unconstrained k-means cost for a set of centers C, which is the sum of the squared distance between x and its closest center C. Dasgupta et al. Provided an algorithm that, given a set of centers K as input and converts this clustering to a threshold tree T. The cost of this threshold tree T is at most order k squared times the cost given by the center set C. They also define the price of expandability as the ratio between the cost given by the decision tree T and the optimal unconstrained k-means cost. Here, if we pick the input center set C by some constant approximation algorithm for k-means clustering, then this provides an order k squared upper bound on the price of expandability. They also provide an omega log k lower bound on the price of expandability. Later, 3 independent works by Makarychev and Shan, Glamis et al. And Asfandari improved the upper bound to around order k, and they also provide an almost matching lower bound. These upper bounds are very nice because they don't depend on the size of dataset N and the dimension D. However, in practice, the number of clusters K can be 100 or 1000, which might be large for this approximation ratio. Charika and Hu provide better bounds for low-dimensional instance, especially for 2-dimensional space. They get an order log k upper bound. To get better approximation ratio, Frost et al. Designed a greedy algorithm to expand the tree to more than k leaves. The following figure shows the optimal unconstrained k-means clustering. If we pick the left threshold tree T with 3 leaves, then we will partition two points from their closest center. However, if we add 2 threshold cuts and reassign these 5 leaves, then we can obtain the same clustering as the optimal k-means clustering. This shows a trade-off between the cost of expandable clustering and the expandability. Their experiments showed that this greedy algorithm performs very well in practice. However, we noticed that in the worst case, this greedy algorithm only provides an order k-square approximation. In this work, we provide a new bicriterial approximation algorithm, which takes a set of k-centers C and a parameter delta between 0 and 1 as input. Then this algorithm finds a threshold tree T with 1 plus delta k leaves, such that the expected cost of this threshold tree T is at most order 1 over delta times log squared k times the cost given by center set C. Specifically, if we pick the parameter delta equals to 0.1, then our algorithm achieves an order log squared k approximation with a tree with 1 plus delta k leaves. In practice, we usually use the elbow method to choose the number of clusters k. The elbow method provides that the optimal cost for k centers is approximately close to the optimal cost for 1 plus delta k centers. Thus, in this case, our algorithm provides a threshold tree T with 1 plus delta k leaves, such that the cost is at most order log squared k times the optimal cost for 1 plus delta k leaves, for 1 plus delta k centers. We also provide an almost matching low bound, which shows there exists an instance X with k clusters, such that for every threshold tree T with 1 plus delta k leaves has cost at least omega 1 over delta times log squared k times the optimal k-means cost. We now describe our algorithms. Our algorithm is a divide and conquer algorithm. This algorithm recursively partitions the d-dimensional space into disjoint regions. Every region is assigned some centers from the center set C. Initially, all centers are assigned to the entire space RD, which corresponds to the root of the tree. Then we iteratively cause a subroutine named divide and share. At every iteration, each region V is partitioned to 2 disjoint regions, V left and V right. Each data point is assigned to the region that contains this data point, while when we assign centers to these regions, some centers are shared between these regions, which means some centers are assigned to both V left and V right. Our algorithm stops if each region is assigned only 1 center. Now we describe the most important subroutine divide and share. So consider a region with more than 2 centers, which correspond to the blue rectangle in the figure. And all red squares are centers assigned to this region. We first compute the median point of these centers. Here, the median point is this black point, which means for each coordinate, the value of this point is a median of the coordinate values for all centers. Thus, there are half of centers in the left of this black point and half of centers in the right of this point. Then we move the origin to this median point and find the furthest center to this origin point. And we define the radius r as this maximum distance, which is also called the radius of this region. Okay, then we sample a threshold cut as follows. We first uniformly sample coordinate I between 0 and d, between 1 to d. And then we uniformly sample a parameter t between 0 and r squared. We now pick a threshold cut in coordinate I with threshold square root of t and partition this space into two disjoint regions, left and right. Now we need to assign centers to these two new regions. To do this, we slightly shift this threshold cut to left and right. Specifically, we generate a threshold cut at 1 minus epsilon times square root of t and assigns all centers in the right of this left cut to the right region. Similarly, we generate a right cut at 1 plus epsilon times square root of t and assigns all centers in the left of this right cut to the left region. For example, the blue rectangle here in the figure is the left region, and all red squares are centers assigned to the left region. Here we notice that there is one center which is outside of this left region, this blue box, which is also assigned to the left region because this red center is in the left of the right cut 1 plus epsilon times square root of t. Consider a point x which is close to the boundary of the left region. In our algorithm, this point x is not separated from its closest center by our cuts. Then we will recursively cause our algorithm divide and share on the left region and the right region separately. To analyze this algorithm, we need to upbound the expected total cost and the number of leaps. First, we provide some motivations for choosing the threshold cut like this and why this reduces the expected cost. So first, why we need to choose a threshold cut at square root of t. So consider a point x with closest center at the origin. If we pick a threshold cut that separates x and c, then we need to reassign x to the furthest center in this case, with a penalty equals to radius squared. In our algorithm, the probability of separating x and c is equals to the squared distance between x and c divided by d times radius squared. Thus, the expected penalty for this point x is around the squared distance between x and c divided by d, which is small compared to the original cost of point x. However, if we directly choose t as the threshold cut, then the probability of separating x and c is approximately the L1 distance between x and c divided by the radius r. Then the expected penalty is approximately the L1 distance between x and c times the radius, which might be very large if the radius r is very large. Well, not every point has the closest center at the origin. So we use this buffer zone idea to reduce the separation probability of separating a center, a point x with its closest center c. So here, consider we pick one cut in coordinate I. Due to this buffer zone idea, X and C are separated if and only if Xi is greater than square root of T and Ci is less than 1 minus epsilon times square root of T. The most important observation here is by some calculation, this separation probability is upper bounded by Xi minus Ci squared divided by epsilon times R squared. By combining all coordinates, the probability of separating X and its closest center C is proportional to the squared distance between X and the C. Since the penalty is around R squared, the expected penalty is approximately the square distance between X and C divided by D times epsilon. By analyzing the expected number of cuts in our algorithm, we can upper bound the total cost of our algorithm. Now we turn to the analysis of the number of leaves given by our algorithm. Consider any fixed center C. There are 3 different events happens in one iteration. Event 1 happens if C is duplicated. The event 2 happens if C is separated from the trunk. Here the trunk is defined as a region contains the median or the origin. Event 3 happens if C is not duplicated and remains in the trunk. Among these 3 events, event 1 and event 2 are the most interesting events. If event 1 happens, then we know that the number of duplicates will increase by 1. If event 2 happens, then the number of centers in the same leaf as center C will decrease by a factor of 2. Why? Because suppose there are k tilde centers in the original region. Since the leaf with center C does not contain the median point, then this leaf contains at most k tilde over 2 centers. Thus, in our algorithm, we will see one of these 3 events happens at one iteration. We divided all iterations into levels based on event 2, which means if event 2 happens, then we go to the next level. Because event 2 happens, the number of centers will decrease by a factor of 2. There are at most log k levels. Now we need to analyze the expected number of duplicates in one levels. This expected number of duplicates will equal to the number of event 1 happens till we see an event 2, which is equal to the probability of event 1 or event 2 happens divided by the probability of event 2 happens. In our algorithm, we know that as shown in the figure, the event 1 or event 2 happens if the center C is in the right of the left buffer cut, which is 1 minus epsilon times square root of T. This probability is proportional to 1 over 1 minus epsilon squared. The event 2 happens with probability proportional to 1 over 1 plus epsilon squared. Thus, the expected number of duplicates is around 1 plus 4 epsilon. By taking epsilon approximately equals to delta divided by log k, the expected number of leaves contains center C given by our algorithm is at most 1 plus delta. Since we have at most k centers, so combining these leaves for all k centers, we have the expected number of leaves given by our algorithm is at most 1 plus delta times k. Okay, to summarize our results. So here in our paper, we consider the expandable k-means clustering, which is a clustering that is easy to understand by human. For expandable clustering, we lose a factor of order k comparing to the unconstrained k-means if we choose an exactly k-leaves threshold tree T. However, we lose only order log squared k if we use 1 plus delta k leaves. There are many open problems in this area. So first, this expandable clustering with threshold tree T already shows some hierarchical properties. Can we find a good hierarchical expandable clustering? Second, mentioned in Bandarpadia et al., can we find a good expandable clustering by removing some points? Finally, also mentioned by Liren et al., can we find a good expandable clustering with a shallow threshold tree T? Thank you.